And if you're putting yourself in an uncomfortable position in training, then that's going to become natural in competition.
That Triathlon Show, episode 55. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. As always, I'm your host, Michael, and my guest on today's interview is Danielle Stefano, an Australian triathlon coach, and she is the owner of Elotik Pro Triathlon, which is her own squad, which she has recently founded after working for several years at a federational and institutional level within Australian triathlon, and among other things and accomplishments, going to the London Olympics in 2012 at, I believe, 28 years old. So that is a pretty stellar achievement. We'll talk a bit more about that in the interview. We talk about a lot of different things in the interview that all of you will definitely find very, very interesting, because Danielle has a kind of an unorthodox background in coaching, not actually being a triathlete herself. And she has seen many different sports from both coaching and sports scientist perspective, including rowing, cycling, swimming, basketball, you name it, really. And that is one of the main things that I want to bring out with this interview, how much you can really learn from different sports, and being a coach and being involved as a sports scientist or whatever role you have in other sports than triathlon, and use that within triathlon. And that it's important to bring an outside perspective to triathlon and keep a wide lens. And Danielle is a perfect example of that with all that she has achieved. She is a coach at the very highest level. So I'm very happy to bring you Danielle Stefano of Elotik Pro Triathlon. All right, today on That Triathlon Show, I'm with Danielle Stefano, an Australian triathlon coach calling in from Girona. How are you doing tonight, Danielle?
Very good, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. And we were just chatting briefly before going on record about what you're doing with your squad down in Girona and teaming up with the New Zealand squad as well. You actually have your own coaching business, Elotik Pro Triathlon. Is that how you pronounce it? I should have asked that before. I realize now.
No, that's okay. Yeah, Elotik Pro Triathlon. That's correct.
Okay, excellent. Why don't you give us a brief background about your triathlon coaching history? It's pretty interesting and not the more conventional one, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's right. I haven't really taken a, orthodox route to coaching, but I started off as a sports scientist at the Victorian Institute of Sport in Melbourne. And I came through their trainee program, and then was working kind of casually and into full time with them for about 10 years all up. And with that, I was working with triathlon, but also with swimming, track and field, cycling, and men's hockey. And so I had a lot of experience across a number of different sports, and my main area was in physiology. And so with that, I was working obviously with the triathlon program with the head coach at the time, who was Jono Hall. And then, Jono ended up taking the head coach position with the USA triathlon team at the start of 2012. And at that point, we had two athletes in contention for the Olympics, which was Erin Densham and Brendan Sexton. And, they came to me and said, look, you know us better than anybody else. Now that Jono's gone, can you kind of coach us through to London? And I'll be honest, I was a little bit shocked, but also very honoured as well that they had the confidence in me to kind of take them through the selection period and into London. And so that's when I was allowed to take a bit of a break from my sports science duties and pursue the coaching aspect of things with Erin and Brendan. And so spent a couple of months over in Europe and ended up at the Olympics with them. And obviously had a really good experience there, with Erin winning bronze medal, and Brendan, his first Olympics, came 35th. And then came back from London, and I was back into my sports science job, and I was just missing the coaching part of things again. And they still hadn't filled the role at VIS for the head coach position, and I ended up going through the interview process when they went through that again, and was lucky enough to get the job. So I was the head coach at VIS for 4 years, And with that was obviously one of the high performance coaches for Triathlon Australia as well. And then, now just at the start of this year, I've just stepped away from that and started up my own business with Elotik. So having that as a high performance program for not only Australian athletes, but internationals as well.
And what does your squad look like at the moment in Elotik?
So at the moment, got a few different athletes. So I've got my able-bodied athletes, which some of the, top guys that you might have heard of is Marcel Walkington, who's just come onto the WTS scene this year, and Tamsin Moana Vale as well. And then got some younger athletes with Damon Bogue, and then Mitch Kibbe also in there. And then I've got one of our para-triathlon athletes who is Kate Doughty. And Kate is a PS5 athlete. She is missing a hand. And this year at the moment, Kate's ranked number 1 in the world. So she had a really good year this year with 2 wins and a bronze in the World Para-Triathlon Series. And then, I also have a under 23 Chilean athlete, Martin Aloa, who is also on board. And he'll be racing at the World Champs this year as well in Rotterdam.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, you're now in Girona, so you split your base between Girona in Spain and Australia. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, obviously, we pretty much just follow the sun, I guess. But we spend the summer in Australia, in Melbourne, and then obviously we have our domestic series back there between Australia and New Zealand. So it makes sense for us to be based there, and then come around about May. So normally around the time of the Yokohama WTS race, we then move our base to Girona in Spain, given most of our competition is in Europe or America, and also the climate's obviously a lot better here. So from a travel perspective and a climate perspective, it makes more sense to be based here in Europe.
Right. I want to go back a bit to your background again, and the fact that you haven't done any competitive triathlon yourself. You come from that sports science background, and you have been coaching a lot of different sports. You have been competing or playing basketball yourself. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I was a basketballer and a dancer, so very weird mix, I know. But yeah, I've never done a triathlon myself, and wasn't a triathlete or not even a basketballer at an elite level, to be honest. But yeah, I guess, and that was probably, I've obviously copped a lot of criticism about that when I first started early on, when I first moved into coaching, about not just being a person who hasn't been involved as an athlete, but being a young female as well didn't go down too well with a lot of people, which I found a surprise. So, it created, I guess, a little bit of controversy, but for me, it never really bothered me, or I didn't think that I couldn't do it, mainly because the main people who I guess meant the most to me was the athletes, and the athletes themselves had full confidence in me as a coach and my ability. I had their support from day one. So that was the main thing for me. And I guess, with my background and not being an elite athlete, I could think from outside of the box, and I guess draw on some of my external experiences and not be set in, I guess, my own, training ways if I was from an elite athlete background.
Do you have some examples of that kind of out-of-box thinking that you think not being a triathlete yourself has helped you with?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess, obviously triathlon's a highly physiological sport. And so for me, that was, physiology was my bread and butter for 10 years. So working with, triathlon, but also the individual aspects of the sport. So with swimming, cycling and track and field, I was highly involved with the coaches and what they were doing from a prescription perspective, but also a technical perspective. And I was able to see, I guess, what the individual sports did and how they elicited different responses in training, and how they got, got to push their athletes to be able to get a performance, and then bring that back to, all right, well, how can we do that in triathlon? And, even I had a lot to do with our rowing program as well. And even just, you might think, all right, one's in a boat and then you've got triathlon with 3 different sports, but they're both, big endurance sports that have some similarities in terms of the training, and being able to, I guess, kind of cross-pollinate with our rowing coaches. They learn a lot from me and I learn a lot from them in terms of how they set up different training sessions and recovery and things like that. So that was one side of it, was the physiological thing. I had a really good understanding and good grasp on how the body works and how it responds to different stimulus. But then from a technical perspective, I was lucky enough to have exposure to, Australia's best coaches, and, some of those coaches are world leading coaches as well. So, from a swimming perspective, I worked daily with, Rowan Taylor and Ian Pope, who at the time were coaching, Liesl Jones, Grant Hackett, Michael Klim. So I was working with those guys and, trying to perfect their stroke with them and look at what was required to be able to swim efficiently but fast at the same time. And then from a cycling perspective, like Dave Sanders, who I'm not sure if you've heard of Dave, but Dave's been responsible for a lot of our top Australian road cyclists with their development, and, like Cadel Evans, Simon Guerin, Simon Clark. So spending a lot of time with Davo in the car and picking his brains on, what he would do to try and improve performance for our cyclists was really valuable for me. And the same with running, working with Dick Telford and Nick Badeau, who was able to, talk to them about, their middle distance and distance athletes and, what worked and what didn't work and how they'd set up their training week and training month. They, like the individual disciplines, I learned a lot from. And then obviously from Jono Hall, who was the triathlon coach at the time. Jono and I worked very closely together for, it's kind of 8 years. So I learned a lot from Jono and his experience.
Yeah, that's a fascinating topic about how you can get some things from the individual disciplines and then apply it to triathlon, because obviously that's what triathletes did in the early days, right? They tried to take a runner's program and a cyclist program and a swimmer's program and put them all together and train like that. And we've learned over time that doesn't really work, and you need to be specific to the sport of triathlon and try to put them all together in a more sensible way. But that said, obviously there are a ton of things that you can learn from each individual sport. So do you have any specific examples of what you have applied and learned from those other coaches and the other sports that you now use regularly in your triathlon training and that are like founding principles of your coaching philosophy?
Look, you're right in terms of, having individual coaches for the individual disciplines. And so many times, like you said, we've seen that it doesn't work, and you do need to have, I guess, someone that understands the full picture. And I guess, for me, particularly with Jono and seeing how he operated, it was, he obviously called upon a lot of those individuals as well when he was a coach, but ensuring, I guess, the management of the load and being able to make sure that you still pushing the athletes and getting as much as you possibly can out of them, but then also allowing for rest and adaptation for those benefits to occur. So for me, I guess I used to always talk to Rowan Taylor quite a lot about how he'd structure his swim sessions. And what I learnt from him was that, obviously you can probably push them a little bit harder in the water than you can with a lot of the other disciplines. And so for me, I didn't necessarily structure my swim sessions in triathlon like a swim coach would, because we simply weren't swimming as much as swimmers do. So taking, I guess, the best parts of Rowan's program and what he did from a programming perspective, and making sure that when we were in the water, we pretty much do quality every time we're in the water. There's no real kind of, opportunity to just have, junk mileage or anything like that for triathletes. You really need to have bang for your buck. And Rowan did have some experience with triathletes, and that was one thing that he kind of said to me, that, they're pretty fit people, but do they need to be doing as many Ks in the water as they potentially do?
Yeah, that's a really good point and a specific tactic that listeners can take away, and definitely agree. That's what I do myself in my training as well. And my coach has had me on that kind of program, and totally agree that it works. I want to move into your responsibilities as a coach a little bit, and the different roles that you take with your athletes, especially since you have a squad. Can you talk a little bit about that first, what your different responsibilities as a coach of an elite squad are?
Yeah, sure. I think, well, yeah, first and foremost, it's pretty much to like lead and guide the athletes to help them have continued improvement in their performance and help them reach their goals. And obviously, like with the different athletes, there's different levels and different goals and achievements that they're setting out towards. And my responsibility is to help them get there and help them do what they need to do to achieve that. And I guess a big thing with me and my philosophy with my coaching is to enable to be able to give the athletes the tools to be able to take ownership and accountability of their own development and performance. I am a strong believer in creating empowered athletes, and I don't want them to be dependent upon me and just listening to everything I do and do it religiously without even, asking a question or understanding why we do things. So for me, I think there's a responsibility of not only, coaching them from a technical and physiological perspective, but coaching them as people as well to understand why they do it and to make those decisions and have confidence in themselves to be able to, take charge and take control of their own destiny, really.
So yeah, you coach elite athletes at the moment mostly, but do you find that they have a basic grasp of the theory and the principles of training and physiology and why they do what they're doing, or do you actually need to teach them that from the ground up?
Yeah, look, some do. And those, I guess, that have been with me for a bit longer understand. But I always like to, when I get new athletes on board, explain to them that, I want them to ask questions. And if they don't understand or they're thinking, why is she making me do this? Ask the question why. Like, what is the purpose to this session, or what are we trying to get out of it? Because I believe that if the athlete has a clear understanding of why I'm trying to do something with them, then you're going to get more out of them in training, and they'll push themselves a little bit more in that performance because they understand the reason behind it. If they think, that you're just going into a training session and I'm just giving them a hard session because, I'm in a bad mood or something, then, they don't apply themselves as, potentially some of the athletes may not apply themselves as well as they need to. So I like to give an explanation of why we do certain things, but I also encourage the athletes to ask questions if they are unsure of themselves.
Is that how it commonly goes, that you don't get them to apply themselves enough if they don't understand it, or can it be the other way around as well, that they go too hard in these sessions because they don't understand the value of that? Or what is, if I let me rephrase the question, what are one or a couple of the most common mistakes that you see athletes make before they start understanding why they do those sessions that you have them do?
Yeah, I think you were right in what you were just saying just then, is that you either get athletes that are going too hard when you don't want them to go as hard as they are, or they're going too easy when you want them to go hard. So for instance, like for example, like we might do a swim session where I'll start off the main set and it might be, say, 450s dive max, and I want them to go absolutely max. And then they'll go into some more threshold work. And the purpose for that, for me, is to try and simulate the start of a race. So it's an all-out sprint pretty much to get to the first buoy, to try and get some, a good position and potentially clear water around that first buoy. So it's always a really fast start. And then people start to get into a bit of a rhythm and you can hold feet and then, kind of sit at that threshold pace. So, sometimes when we go into a session, I'll say to them, I don't care, what the time is. I just want you to go all out 100% and then be able to try and start the main set with this, lactate accumulated already in your system. So if the athlete doesn't actually understand the point of those first dive 50s, then they can sometimes hang back and save themselves because they know what's coming up next. Whereas for me, I'd rather them go all out and potentially fade. That to me gives me more information than somebody holding back and saving themselves just to get through the set.
Yeah, great example. And there's tomorrow's swim workout for you short course listeners out there. That sounds like a great one, actually. What else? So moving on to the other roles and the actual coaching role, we discussed briefly in our email conversation about the coach-athlete relationship and the different dimensions to that. So, and you take an all-encompassing had a responsibility in those roles, as far as I understand. So can you talk about that as well?
Yeah, sure. It's, I guess I spend so much time with my elite guys, on the road and back home. I'm pretty much with them here 24/7 when we're over in Girona, and when we're back in Melbourne, I see them, most weeks it'll be at least 6 out of 7 days, and for some of them it's 7 as well. So I not only become their coach, I end up, I guess being their psych, their mum, their big sister, like everything really. You kind of take it all on board, depending on what's going on. But I guess, for me, it's I guess try and have a really strong and open relationship with my athletes, because I do think that when we are away and there isn't really too many people around but our squad, if they do need to talk to someone about what's going on either within triathlon or outside of triathlon, that they do feel comfortable that they can talk to me, or at least just say, look, hey, I might be a bit off today because I've got this going on in my life. So, I play a big role with them from a mental perspective as well. I also can give them advice on some of their nutritional aspects, both for a race and for training as well, for performance and recovery. So obviously my background allows me to kind of help out with that. And then, I guess I also help them out with their kind of sponsorship things as well, with their sponsors, and trying to, help, obviously get sponsorship with different companies. You name it and I'm kind of involved with it, really, to be honest.
Yeah, that sounds like a 24/7 job almost.
Yeah, pretty much.
So you communicate with them 6-7 days a week, as you said. And how does that communication and what the athletes tell you about things in triathlon, how they felt after a training session or after a race, and outside of triathlon, how do you take that into account when you plan their training? Let's start with the training and physical side of things. Do you change a lot in their program? Is it really flexible and dynamic, or do you have it and do you want them to try to stick to what you have laid out for them?
Yeah, no, it definitely is dynamic, just depending on how they feel. And I guess the advantage of me being a face-to-face coach is you can get, I guess, not only the feedback from them that they're giving you, but you can actually see the athlete, and, you're obviously collecting other data as well, whether it's, from their power meter or their Garmin or whatever. So you've got a really, I guess, holistic view of how they're responding to the training load, and whether you do need to adjust things and make it, give them an easier day or up the stimulus. So, I think the communication from the athlete is imperative, and that to me will dictate, whether I change training slightly for them. I never really kind of completely uphaul the whole week, but it might just be that you might just go a little bit easier, or you might just cut the intensity back slightly in a session to enable them to get through the week with what you've got planned. Because I guess for me, my big thing is, you want consistency in training. So there's no point smashing an athlete if you think, oh yeah, I can get them through this and just smash them, but then they might be, out for the count for a couple of days. I'd rather push them just, before they break, and then still be able to have them training at a lesser intensity, rather than having them do no training at all because they're having to recover.
So that's typically, I guess, the way it goes, that you more often than upping the stimulus, as you mentioned, you rather reduce the workload just a little bit, or is there a 50-50 balance of those two?
I guess it depends on the athlete. There's some athletes that I know that I, need to kind of completely back off, and they have to have, just real easy aerobic day to come back up again. There's other athletes that I have that I know that if I just, say reduce the set, I might, instead of doing 4 sets, you do 3 sets, that's enough of a break for them to get them through. So it is very individual, and you get to obviously know the athlete quite well when you're spending so much time and you're seeing them in the environment. So yeah, it does vary depending on how they respond.
Okay, but what I actually meant was that do you ever like add something, push them a little bit harder in the workout if you see that they're really, really going on they are on fire in that training session or have been for a week or several weeks already? Do you ever add any more sets to their workout, for example, or make it a little bit longer?
Oh, look, to be honest, I probably don't necessarily make it longer. I might like surprise them with, just say it's an extra effort, not because of how well they've been doing in the set, but it might just be something that I've got up my sleeve that I think, all right, if they've handled it well, I'm going to do this anyway. So for example, like I might get them to do, say, a 100-meter best effort at the end of a race pace session, in the water. But yeah, normally if I've got a hard session planned, and they do it really, really well, then that's great. I don't need to add any more to it. They're obviously pushing themselves. I might push them to go harder in the set, but I don't normally add extra to the set. Okay,
excellent. So what about those outside stressors that we mentioned already? How do they affect the programming side of things and how you push them or hold them back in workouts?
Yeah, I think it's more, you can kind of tell really with the athletes if they're struggling with some stuff outside of triathlon. And I guess, with some of the athletes I've had in the past, there's, personal issues, whether it's family or, relationship issues that you can just see that they're just struggling and they just need a bit of time to, I guess, get over whatever's happening or sort that out. And so for me, I think a lot of the time in the past, I've just, it's been, I guess, beneficial for the athlete to have me as someone that they can talk to, because a lot of the time when they are away, they don't feel like they can talk to, their training mates or anything about that stuff. So I often, just take them out for a coffee and have a chat and just make sure that they can kind of get what they need to off their chest or for some of them it's just have a cry really, because they don't feel like they can, they have to be this kind of strong person at training. So there's that kind of side to it. But then, normally if they're really struggling, I just get them to have, a day off, tell them, go to the beach and just kind of try and clear your mind and just get you, don't worry about triathlon for today. Just, kind of have your own kind of space and do what you need to do.
Okay, perfect. One thing that you mentioned earlier about what you learned from Jonah Hall was about managing training load, and that just got stuck in the back of my head all the time. But I wanted to move on with in succession with these questions in a logical order. But now I want to ask you a little bit more specifically about managing training load. Do you have any specific tools? For example, an obvious answer is Training Peaks with their performance management chart. That's one way to do it. Do you use that, or do you have some other ways? Is it just on intuition and being with the athletes and seeing how they respond, or how does that work for you, the training load management side of things?
Yeah, look, I do use Training Peaks in terms of, putting everything up there and having all the athletes' files in there. So obviously you're getting, there is the performance management chart and, just getting, the weekly totals of what the athletes are doing. But to be honest, it is probably more intuition and knowing the athlete and having, an understanding of what you're wanting to get out of them and what's actually occurring. So the performance management chart and the data that you do kind of get through Training Peaks is, just a backup for me and something that reaffirms what I'm thinking a lot of the time. So I don't make decisions based purely on what Training Peaks is telling me, but I do use that as a reference to kind of see if what I'm thinking is potentially going on, and that can sometimes help as well. Okay, excellent.
Finally, you are starting to work with some age groupers in Elotik Pro Triathlon. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I've obviously got my main elite group that I'm working with, but also opening up and giving the opportunity to a few age groupers to come on board as athletes with the Elotik Pro Triathlon squad. And most of that will be via correspondence, just purely because I'm all over the shop as well. But there is the opportunity, whether it be in Girona or in Melbourne, to potentially, join in on some sessions as well, if that works for wherever the athletes are placed. But it's a new area for me. I've had a little bit of experience in the past working with age groupers, but would like to kind of go down that track for the moment for a few select people.
Is there any specific distance that the age groupers will be focusing on that you prefer, and then a specific level of age groupers? Who does this apply to? Who would be a good candidate to send you a request?
Yeah, look, it's I'm not like worried about what distance it is. Any distance will be fine. But I guess I'm looking for people that are really, I guess, dedicated to triathlon and really kind of enthused about their own performance and wanting to, I guess even as an age grouper, act in an elite way, really. That's probably what I'm looking at, because the one thing I do enjoy is I enjoy people who are, I guess, self-motivated. And the one thing I don't want is I don't want to have to be kind of, on people's backs saying, come on, you need to do this all the time. I really like and enjoy people who are involved and are really, I guess, enthusiastic about their own training and their own development. So yeah, that's pretty much my main request, I guess, is anyone who's really enthusiastic and committed to their training, then go ahead and apply. That'd be great.
I don't think there's a shortage of those people in triathlon.
No, exactly.
All right. So one final question before rolling into the rapid fire questions. If you could just list out very briefly a few key points, just a couple or three, that you consider critical for successful triathlon training and that you emphasize a lot with your athletes, without going into any detail on them, but
yeah, sure.
List them out.
So first of all, communication between the coach and the athlete is imperative, and it needs to be open and honest both ways. So that's a big thing for me. I guess challenging the athletes to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I know that that's a quote that everyone uses so frequently, but it really is quite applicable to triathlon. And if you're putting yourself in an uncomfortable position in training, then that's going to become natural in competition. And I guess the other thing is almost having a skill checklist for yourself to kind of go through when you're not only in a race, but in training and under fatigue. So for me, it's, if we're looking at the run, if you're not hitting paces or you're falling back in a race, what is it that makes you actually run fast? What do you need to focus on? And what are those key things to think about to enable you to run fast or get back on track, rather than letting your mind kind of wander away and just focus on the negatives and have negative self-talk creep in. Having a race checklist or a skill checklist is a really important thing to have as well, to be able to stay relaxed.
I think that's really good, the last point about a skill checklist. I mean, we've heard that tip like phrased different ways, but not in terms of a checklist. I think that's something that can make it a bit more tangible, I guess, for people, and myself included, that to have those things that you know beforehand, that if you start to fall back, then check, is this okay? Am I really keeping my hip up high? Am I driving my knees up and so on the run, or whatever it is, whichever discipline it is? That's a really useful tip. I like that a lot. So moving on to the rapid fire questions, starting with, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to triathlon?
Yeah, this one's a bit obscure. It's not really directly related to triathlon, but I do think it's directed to triathlon and elite sport in general. But probably book is The Chimp Paradox by Professor Steve Peters. And he's worked quite closely with a lot of the GB cyclists. But it's, I guess, understanding your emotions and thoughts and the negative self-talk that can kind of creep in when you are competing or training. It really talks about mind management. So yeah, it's probably my favorite book.
Yeah, I've heard about that before, actually, on a marathon talk, I think. And I think there's a new book that talks about that concept as well, with Simon Marshall's The Brave Athlete, Calm the F Down, or I think that's what it's called. So.
Yeah, I've seen that as well come out. Yeah, so yeah. I mean, I think it's a really important aspect for triathlon.
Yeah. What's your favorite piece of gear or equipment?
I'm not a massive gear fan, but I'd probably say snorkel, just because when I'm, working with athletes trying to correct stroke or improve stroke, the snorkel just allows them to be able to focus on what they're doing with their arms, hips and legs rather than having to worry about breathing. So yeah, probably the snorkel, I'd say.
Yeah. Who's somebody in triathlon or related somehow? It can be actually from anybody in your sporting background that you admire or look up to.
Yeah, I've probably got a couple actually, but to pick one, I'd probably say at the moment it'd be Darren Smith, to be honest. Darren's been really good to me. He's one of my mentors, and I probably admire, not obviously everyone kind of knows his sporting background and what he's achieved as a triathlon coach, but for me, I probably admire his willingness to share his knowledge and his experience with not just myself, but a number of coaches. But yeah, he's been really good to me and my development. So yeah, I'd probably say Darren.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Danielle. This has been great. You can be found on Elotik Pro Triathlon.com. And do you have any social media that we should follow?
Yeah, sure. So I've got our Instagram, which is at Elotik Pro Triathlon, and also Facebook as well, Elotik Pro Triathlon on Facebook. So both of those medias, and also on Twitter, just my own account with Danielle Stefano.
Excellent. And if you are that type of very ambitious age grouper that may be interested in having Danielle as a coach, then do visit her website and send her an email from that. Thank you. This has been Danielle Stefano from Elotik Pro Triathlon. It was a pleasure having you on the show, Danielle.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Enjoyed it.
All right, that's a wrap for today's interview. I hope that you enjoyed it. Please send me feedback to michael@scientifictriathlon.com. That's Michael with a K. I certainly enjoyed talking to Danielle a lot, and I think that she is an exciting triathlon coach to watch and follow what she will do with her squad and Elotik Pro Triathlon. Maybe we'll get a chance to catch up sometime with me moving to Lisbon and she basing herself and her squad in Girona in Spain. A long time of the year during the winter of Australia. So yeah, we'll see. I have one listener question that I want to answer on today's episode. I have already answered it on email, but I'll take it on the podcast as well, because a lot of listeners are asking these similar kinds of questions. This is Samit. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. He is asking about having an Olympic race coming up in a few weeks. He writes, I am wondering how to pace myself. Is there a certain workout I can do to tell me my race pace? Or should I aim at a particular heart rate zone? Could you please throw some light on that? Yes, Samit, I would say that I have actually now kept up the correspondence with you and know that you're more of a beginner triathlete. So definitely for you, it would be keeping for an Olympic staying within that zone free and not going over that, I think is the sensible way to do it. Whether it's power or heart rate that you use, either one is fine, or pace. So on the bike, you could use heart rate or power, and on the run, you could use pace or heart rate. And I have 2 episodes on that. Those are episodes 29 and 30. I go into training zones for cycling and running in those. So just go to thattriathlonshow.com and click those old episodes, or go to scientifictriathlon.com/TTS29 or TTS30, and that's the numbers 29 and 30. For the swim, go hard as you can sustain for the duration, and I would suggest doing a 1500 meter time trial in training before the race and see what it feels like, and hopefully you pace yourself pretty well on that, and that will then help you know what it should feel like in your race. All right, we'll be back as usual on Monday with another episode of That Triathlon Show. If you enjoyed the show, could you please do me a favor and give it a rating and review in your podcast player app or on iTunes? That would really, really help me spread the show to as many triathletes as possible, and I appreciate every single review. They make my day. Remember that for this episode and all the other episodes, you can go to thattriathlonshow.com to check out all the complete show notes. Until Monday, keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.